Look, boys and girls, the only reason there are white people is because black people came here first, and they faded as they moved farther and farther north from the equator. Their melanin faded so that their skin, their hair, and their eyes got lighter. Their brains didn't get smaller, but their skin, their hair, and their eyes got lighter. That's the only reason you children can call yourselves white. And you aren't white. We are all shades of brown.
What's up, study group? Welcome to Black History Student. I'm your host, Black Butterfly. Today I'll be explaining the origins of black-skinned African people, who are the first humans to have walked the planet. The road to human evolution is long, actually billions of years long, but it's amazing and will give you a profound appreciation for this giant rock we live on called Earth. In order to understand how humans evolve, it's first imperative to be familiar with evolution and what contributes to a species evolving from one form to another. Humans didn't just emerge one day with all of our biological elements necessary for survival. We evolved from much lower life forms that can be traced all the way back to when the planet was first forming some 3.8 billion years ago. Now, evolution occurs when a species changes gradually to a new type of species, and this typically occurs through chance, random mutation, and natural selection of genetic traits. These changes can be sporadic or over time with consistent changes. Two species are genetically the same if they can reproduce with each other. However, as the genes of a species make small changes over long periods of time, the final biological product would be a new species unable to reproduce with their original population. Once the species are no longer able to reproduce, they are considered two different types of species. Now, according to scientist Richard Moody in the book The Atlas of Life on Earth, the Earth is Landscapes and Lifeforms, new life forms evolve from four mechanisms, and this includes transformation, speciation, extinction, and adaptive radiation. Moody describes the mechanisms as: in transformation, a relatively small population adapts to gradual changes in its environment, eventually giving rise to a group that is different enough from its ancestors to be considered a new species. Sometimes, environmental changes create physical barriers that splits a population, isolating them geographically so that they cannot make contact for mating. Over time, each group will continue to adapt to changes in its local environment. If the changes are sufficiently dramatic or of long enough duration, the groups will become different species, and this is called speciation. This process also occurs when part of a group migrates permanently to a distant location. Over a course of millions of years, adaptive radiation occurs when a small population of organisms grow to become a large group of new individuals. This process typically occurs after a mass extinction, when the few remaining organisms are able to adapt and efficiently reproduce. We'll get into examples of transformation, extinction, speciation, and adaptive radiation later on in this presentation. In his book, The Descent of Man, British naturalist Charles Darwin describes the process of genes naturally changing a species into something new as natural selection. His theory has been widely accepted by the scientific community and basically says that genetic traits are selected by nature for the survival of a species in its geographical or global environment. Darwin says that natural selection will cause one species to be best adapted while surviving on average in greater numbers and procreate more offspring than the other less well endowed species. For instance, some individuals have genetic advantage over others, in other words, speed, intelligence, or even disease resistance, and this strengthens their ability to reproduce efficiently enough to evolve and diversify in their global habitat. Sexual selection is important because breeding offspring that are genetically fit will advance the species in their environment. If genetically deficient species mate and produce offspring, that species may perish over successive generations because they're genetically ill-equipped to diversify. However, the species that selects robust sexual partners will maximize reproduction, evolve, and diversify. Now that we've discussed a bit about the evolution of organisms, let's discuss how changes to the planet directly initiates evolution. Now, as the planet endlessly orbits with the sun around the galaxy, it transitions into two phases, either glacial when there's an ice age or interglacial when there's global warming. During these phases, many events occur around the world, impacting the various life forms in their habitats. For instance, during global warming, animals that once flourished during the Ice Age will begin to struggle as the planet warms. A perfect example of this today are the now endangered Arctic polar bears. Global warming is causing the ice caps to melt twice as fast as the global average. Polar bears depend on ice for hunting, especially seals, as they raise their young on the ice caps, making themselves vulnerable to the hungry polar bears. Many polar bears are literally dying from starvation, and their transparent fur that actually looks white but is really transparent isn't really helping them adapt at all. That transparent coat reflects sunlight, which makes it appear white or even somewhat yellow. The white is advantageous in severely cold Arctic climates because it acts as a camouflage and allows polar bears to efficiently hunt. But underneath it is black skin that absorbs the sun's heat, and there's a large layer of fat for maximum insulation. Because of global warming, they're over-insulated, and the melting ice is exposing their once fully camouflaged bodies to prey. They're struggling to adapt to the changing environment, and unfortunately, they will ultimately perish. But natural selection has always shown that a new type of species will be genetically and behaviorally fit to survive in the new environment. Those animals will replace the polar bears and reproduce and diversify. Now, all living species in existence during Earth's 4.5 billion years old histories have had to adapt to these changes. Many species weren't able to adjust along the way and died off over time. However, others adapted to the changes, and these animals paved the way for newer and higher life forms to evolve. Even now, as Earth continues its endless transition through warm and cold phases, so does the process of evolution. This is why a thorough understanding of Earth's historical activities must be understood in order to appreciate evolution, especially of mankind. Whether it be flora, fauna, landforms such as mountain and continent formation, or even changes to the chemical makeup of the oceans and land, evolution is essentially dependent on the physical condition of the waters, atmosphere, and the surface of the Earth. The planet's long history has been summarized in a calendar that divides its ancient events by eons, eras, periods, epochs, and ages called the geologic time scale. The division of the scale relates to the progressive evolution and extinctions of life forms in their time. Each eon, era, period, epoch, and age represents different stages in Earth's history when the shape of the planet changed, and the various plants and animals that lived and died. Earth's history began in the Precambrian era, which is also called Cryptozoic, meaning hidden life. And the Precambrian includes over 85% of Earth's history, spanning from about 4.5 billion to 541 million years ago. It comprises 3 eons. First, the Hadean, which is Greek for hell. The second, Archaean, which means ancient or beginning. And finally, the Proterozoic, meaning first life. Earth was first forming in the Hadean eon, and it began as a giant ball of liquid rock. There was no life, no water, and poisonous gases dominated the atmosphere. The planet remained this way for billions of years. After the Hadean ended, the planet transitioned to the Archaean eon. This was the time when single-cell organisms called prokaryotes evolved, and these were the first life forms on Earth. Cells are the smallest units of an organism that can carry out the functions of life. Prokaryotes didn't contain a nucleus or DNA structured into chromosomes. These tiny cells simply divided, a process called binary fission, to reproduce and diversify. The first prokaryotic cells are archaea bacteria. Over billions of years, archaea bacteria evolved to cyanobacteria, or blue-green algae, which formed stromatolites. These organisms and others were revolutionary because they used sunlight to make food, releasing oxygen as a result, a process called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis was revolutionary because it produced oxygen in abundance, enriching the waters and atmosphere. Bacteria and cyanobacteria eventually diversified genetically and dominated the waters for millions of years. Without single-cell bacteria producing oxygen in abundance, humans could never have existed. The first bacterial microorganisms initiated the path for mankind to evolve. Over millions of years, 2 or more prokaryotes began to reproduce by fusing, producing eukaryotes, and these are multi-celled organisms with a nucleus and chromosomal DNA. These eukaryotes introduce sexual reproduction. Both Both DNA and sexual reproduction of eukaryotic cells gave rise to the more complex and bigger life forms. We humans are eukaryotes because we don't have just a single cell, but billions of cells, all functioning in complex ways. We have skin cells, bone cells, blood cells, and every type of cell to compose our entire bodies. Sexual reproduction of ancient eukaryotes allowed them to diversify efficiently and spread over wide distances in the waters. They ultimately evolved to 5 kingdom systems, and this includes first the Monera kingdom, which are the archaebacteria and eubacteria, the Protista kingdom, which are the first unicellular eukaryotes, the animal kingdom, which are the food producers, and we humans, plant kingdom, the food producers, and the fungi kingdom, which are the decomposers. Each of these kingdoms are differentiated by how they metabolize and digest food, their cell growth, and photosynthesis and reproduction processes. The last eon in the Precambrian era is called the Proterozoic eon. This eon covers more than 40% of Earth's history. The kingdoms of living things continue to adapt and diversify, especially since there was an abundance of oxygen in the waters and atmosphere. The Proterozoic is also known for the evolution of sponges, cnidarians, including jellyfish and corals, worms, and even invertebrates, which are animals without a backbone. The Proterozoic eon ended with Earth's first mass extinction, wiping out most of the marine animals. It is believed that this event occurred as a result of changes in sea level and a major decrease in oxygen levels. The next era in the geologic timescale is the Paleozoic era, which is referred to the age of the fishes because an explosion of different fish evolved. There are 6 periods in the Paleozoic, including the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, and the Permian. And during each of these periods, many geological events took place. There were continents breaking and colliding due to Earth's fractured crustal plates colliding into each other, separating and scraping past one another. These plates are called tectonic plates, and they're always moving. Their interactions are what causes earthquakes, tsunamis, mountain building, continent separation, and etc. Tectonic plate movements also change sea levels, impacting the chemical composition of the waters, which also modifies the atmosphere and can cause climate changes. Moreover, tectonic plates changes the structure of the planet and the type of animals that dominate. Throughout the global changes, there was an explosion in the diversification of marine animals. Many of them would develop the biological elements necessary for human evolution. For instance, the early sea creatures began with soft bodies, and over millions of years as the planet transitioned to many phases, these animals evolved to invertebrates, or animals with no backbone. And from the invertebrates derived the vertebrates, and even further, the marine animals with skeletons. Claudina was the first sea creature with a skeleton. It was a tiny organism that varied in size from a diameter of 0.3 to 6.5 millimeters and a length between 8 to 150 millimeters. Microscopic organisms transitioned to all sorts of animals, including arthropods, which are insects, centipedes, and millipedes, arachnids, including spiders, mites, and scorpions, and even crustaceans, including slaters, prawn, and crabs. These animals developed an improved skeleton, jointed legs, and are considered the first animals to adapt to terrestrial life. Skeletons were revolutionary and provided a means for animals to diversify. Scientist Audrey Zurevlev tells us in the Atlas of Life on Earth, the Earth, its landscapes, and its life forms that skeletons improve locomotion, as in modern arthropods and vertebrates. They serve as a pedestal for sedentary organisms to filter food from water. They help to grasp and chop up food using claws and teeth and allow for breathing. Skeletons are also an effective defense. In an emergency, an animal can simply run away. The Paleozoic era also gave rise to a species called trilobites, which are a group of arthropods or insects. Trilobites possess the most advanced compound eyes of all animals. Then there were jawless fish, which would be the ancestors of the vertebrates or animals with backbones. Primitive sharks and armor fish even emerged. Fish with bones and armor became very specialized because they could exploit a variety of food and were better protected from prey, allowing them to reproduce and diversify. In the book, The Atlas of Life on Earth, the earth, its landscapes, and its life forms, Dougal-Dixon tells us that, like other vertebrates, fish evolved from small segmented worm-like creatures with nervous systems supported by a beam of gristle that ran the length of their bodies. Segmentation meant that eventually this beam became divided into individual units that evolved into the vertebrae of the backbone. The nerve center or brain became encased in a skeletal box, which eventually evolved into the skull. Gills were supported on skeletal units that grew in pairs on the segments close to the head. The foremost of these evolved into jaws. Paired skeletal structures on segments down the length of the body became ribs, fins, and eventually hips, shoulders, and legs. At this point in evolution, life is getting closer and closer to exiting the water and crawling to land. Lobe-finned fish were significant because they gave rise to the tetrapods, which are the earliest amphibians, or fish that could live in water and on land. Around 359 million years ago, the lobe-finned bony fish evolved over a 10 million year period into the amphibians. Scientist Dixon describes how lobe-finned fish acquired the features that allowed them to crawl out of the water, and he says that all jawed fish already had lungs, and the lobe-finned fish were adapted to fresh water. Their two pairs of flexible, muscular fins became longer and stronger, and developed hinge joints and toes, enabling them to walk. Stronger joints between the vertebrae of the spine gave support to replace the missing cushion of water. Finally, adults lost their gills, which can now use oxygen from the atmosphere instead of water. The first land animals were the amphibians, and they made many changes and adjustments to their new environment. They now had to fight against gravity, maintain their body shape, find food, and reproduce, as they were still laying their eggs in water. The amphibians became well established as they had colonized all the continents and were the primary predators for at least 80 million years. Then around 323 million years ago, flightless insects and mammal-like reptiles had evolved, and they flourished into the final period of the Paleozoic called the Permian period. Now in the Permian swamps, the first lizard-shaped creature arose called Blackhistorystudent. These animals began laying their eggs outside of the water. Their eggs went from leathery to over time becoming hard and watertight that allowed them to lay them on dry land. They died out but had given rise to the Therapsida, which are mammal-like reptiles. According to Dixon, browsing animals that range from rabbit-like beasts to hippopotamus-like beasts and the hunting wolf-like cynodonts had evolved. As time went on, the latter became more and more mammal-like, developing a dentition consisting of specialized nipping, killing, and sharing teeth, producing hairy coats, suckling their young, and adopting mammal-like stances on straight legs. Eventually, they gave rise to the mammals themselves, a group that continued after the ancestral species had all died out. The Permian period ended with a mass extinction that wiped out 96% of all land animals, making this the greatest mass extinction in Earth's history. The extinction wasn't abrupt, as it lasted over millions of years. What caused the extinction isn't really clear, but what is apparent is that a series of events are known to have taken place that contributed to the extermination of both flora and fauna. There were volcanic activities, which changed the chemical composition of the atmosphere. There was global warming, sea levels fluctuated, and etc. The mammal-like reptilian therapsids mostly died out, with the exception of a few that survived into the next major era called the Mesozoic era. These were the animals that eventually produced modern mammals. So far, we've explored how the amphibians produced the reptiles, and now the reptiles are evolving into mammals. The Mesozoic era means middle life, and it spanned from about 251.9 to 66 million years ago. The first period in the Mesozoic era is the Triassic period, also known as the Age of Reptiles, because the terrible lizards, those dinosaurs, roamed the planet. Not to mention the supercontinent Pangaea had formed, allowing plants and animals to journey the planet with ease. Reptiles that evolved from amphibians dominated during the Triassic, and mammals evolved during the late Triassic period. In his book, Spirituality Before Religions, Spirituality is Unseen Science, Science is Seen Spirituality, Professor Kabahiawalta Kamene says that mammals evolved from reptiles. Hydrocodium is an ancestor of all mammals. They were smaller than the top digit on a human pinky finger. Humans dominate the mammals and are the most numerous. Because mammals generate heat from within, they are warm-blooded. Since they could see in the dark and had a refined sense of smell, they hunted at night. Reptiles had 2 bones on either side of their jaw, and the third bone was for sound in the ear. In mammals, these 3 bones shifted from their jaw to their ear. These 3 bones became the middle ear's hammer, anvil, and drum. The heightening of their senses allowed early mammals to survive during and after the age of the dinosaurs. Reptiles were the first vertebrate animals to live entirely on land. The key to the dinosaurs' advancement was the relationship of their legs to their body at the hip, which allowed greater freedom of movement. Finally, their weight rested on their back leg. The best example is the Tyrannosaurus rex, which was the largest animal on Earth. Just as today humans all over the world look different depending on their geographic location, so did the dinosaurs. T-Rex only resided in South America and wasn't all over the planet as Hollywood makes it seem. The dinosaurs were different depending on the part of the world they exploited. By the Jurassic period, spanning from 201 to about 145 million years ago, birds had evolved from dinosaurs. These early birds were of all shapes and sizes. Some had various features including dinosaur-like toothy jaws, while others had beaks. Many birds possessed long lizard-like tails, others had a short tail with feather bunches, and some had tails that resembled today's birds. The dinosaurs were eventually wiped out during the late Cretaceous period, about 66 million years ago. They went extinct as a consequence of a giant comet or an asteroid believed to be the size of Mount Everest that impacted Earth, causing a domino effect of other global catastrophic events, including earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, and ash that filled the atmosphere for millions of years. Once the flora was destroyed, the animals that ate the flora began to perish. And once the animals that ate the flora began to perish, the meat-eating animals perished. It's estimated that some 70% of species went extinct, including the dinosaurs, with the exception of birds, which are also dinosaurs, and some mammals, especially mammals that lived underground. This was Earth's second large mass extinction. When dinosaurs disappeared, the main advantage that mammals had over them was adaptability. They were able to adjust to sudden major changes in climate and habitat. They became extremely diverse as grasslands expanded and provided new feeding opportunities. Now, so far, we've explored the amphibians and reptiles. Now we're about to enter into the world of mammals and eventually encounter the first humans. Alright, study group, before I go on, please take a few seconds to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to know when new videos are released or when I go live. This is a significant way to support the channel, so I'd really appreciate it if you go ahead and do that for me. I'll even take a moment of silence to let you do it. Okay, thank you, study group. I really appreciate your support. I really do. Now let's continue. The most recent era of the Phanerozoic eon is called the Cenozoic era, and it spans from 66 million years ago to today. This era is known as the Age of Mammals because mammals evolved to those that exist today and dominated the planet. The Cenozoic era is divided into 3 major periods, and this includes the Paleogene, Neogene, and Quaternary. The Age of Mammals essentially began with the Paleocene epoch of the Paleogene period, and this spanned over a 10 million year period from 66 to 56 million years ago. The small mammals of the Cretaceous period began to diversify and evolve into larger herbivore and carnivore mammals. Cenozoic mammals evolved quickly into many different types and sizes. Some of the first mammals that gave birth to their young who developed inside their mother's pouch are the marsupials. These animals were special because they gave birth to live babies, opposed to laying hatching eggs. Then the evolution of placental mammals paved the way for humans to be born. For instance, the kangaroo wallaby is one of the first animals whose babies developed inside of their womb and fed on the nutrients provided by the placenta. The placenta read the baby's waist through the umbilical cord, which is the connecting tube between the placenta and the baby. This form of reproduction was more efficient than the marsupial's pouch development, and therefore, unlike the marsupials, the placental mammals advanced and diversified. During the Eocene epoch of the Cenozoic era, spanning from about 56 to 33.9 million years ago, lemur and tarsier primates evolved. These animals are considered to be the ancestors of monkeys and the great apes. The next epoch is the Oligocene epoch, and it spans from 33.9 to about 23.03 million years ago. This epoch was significant because the ancient Old World monkeys evolved. Author Ian Jenkins tells us in the Atlas of Life on Earth, the Earth, its landscapes, and its life forms that primates are characterized by their exceptional brain power and social organization. The order began modestly, about 50 million years ago, with the tiny tree-dwelling animal that resembled a modern mouse lemur or tarsier. Larger specimens weighed only 2.2 pounds. Their descendants colonized almost every part of the world. From these evolved the entire line of anthropoids, the group that eventually gave rise to humans, a much later arrival. About 35 million years ago, in the early Oligocene, the straight-tailed, narrow-snouted Old World monkeys of Africa and Eurasia appeared. Old World monkeys gave rise to the apes, many of which became ground-dwelling. After the Oligocene epoch is the Miocene. Now this epoch spanned from 23 to 5.3 million years ago. This is one of the periods when Earth was experiencing global warming and the African forests were expanding. Ape-tending ponghids, which were the tree-living chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans, and the human-tending hominids, including the great apes that colonized the grasslands, were the dominant mammals during this time. The ponghids had adapted perfectly to the luxurious forests that were advancing, allowing them to reproduce and diversify. However, as the Earth transitioned from the Miocene epoch to the Pliocene between 5.3 to 2.58 million years ago, climate changed again. This time, a multi-million year drought occurred, drying up the forest, leaving the once flourishing ponghids to struggle for survival. These animals dwindled along with the forest, giving opportunity to the human-tending hominids to reproduce and diversify. The hominids' failure to adapt to the forest that thrived during the Miocene now gave them dominance in the grassland-ruined Pliocene epoch. The structure of the African ecosystem is an ideal habitat for a primate making a transition from trees to the ground. Climate changes, including low rainfall and extreme heat, have sporadically impacted Africa. Consequently, our hominid ancestors were forced to make decisions necessary for survival, and this including hunting and killing grassland mammals and avoiding prey, which led to development of their brains and higher thinking capabilities. Eventually, syntax, language, and tool use had advanced. The main difference between human and apes is complex syntax, which chimps and gorillas couldn't obtain due to their short-term memory, minimal language skills, and tree-living lifestyle. Over millions of years of environmental changes, which forced the mammals to advance their survival capabilities, this resulted in higher mental capacity. As a result, the evolution of one species to another occurred. Eventually, several branches of primates evolved, having both ape and human-like characteristics. Around 6 million years ago, a branch of apes known as hominids were ultimately born. Now, hominids are scientifically classified as having two sub-branches, including the homo or human tribe and the pan-troglodytes, which are the chimpanzees. Both branches share a single ancestor, which is why chimpanzees possess 98.8% of human DNA. If you were to take the right side of a chimpanzee and line it up to the left side of a human, you will see both are essentially anatomically alike. Scientists are still searching for the missing hominin link between the two species. The extinct close relatives of Homo sapiens, or modern humans, are the Australopithecines. These man-apes possessed brains the size of apes but were bipedal, meaning they stood on two legs for walking just as humans. Australopithecines exploited a treeless environment, and their height was advantageous because it improved their vision, allowed them to move efficiently over land, and freed up their hands for tool use. Our hominin ancestors' mental capabilities expanded, and as climate changes advanced, various forms of Australopithecus evolved. The oldest known is called Ardipithecus rhamidus, and they are dated around 4.5 to 4.3 million years ago. Their name means root of the ground apes, and they occupied various areas in Ethiopia. They had large canine teeth and narrow molars with enamel, and this suggests that their diet consisted of leaves and fruit. Ardipithecus rhamidus were forest dwellers that were partially bipedal and tree-living. They are said to be among the earliest of human ancestors to use some type of proto-language, possibly capable of vocalizing at the same level as a human infant. Their face was much more pronounced than modern humans, their feet were better suited for walking, but also had a grasping big toe adapting to movement in trees. Their brains were small, and they were approximately 3 to 4 feet in height. Existing possibly around the same time was another branch of hominin called Australopithecus anamensens, meaning southern ape from the lake. This group existed between 4.2 and 3.9 million years ago, and they are thought to be an intermediate between Ardipithecus rhamidus and later hominins. They occupied areas in Kenya and Ethiopia. This group had a narrow and forward-facing jaw with long teeth and protruding canines. Towards the end of their lifespan, they coexisted with Australopithecus afarensis for roughly 100,000 years. Now, afarensis means southern ape from afar, and this group existed about 3.7 to 3 million years ago. They exploited lands in Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Kenya. This group was taller than the previous hominins, standing between 3 to 5 feet tall, and they weighed between 64 to 93 pounds. But just like their cousins, they had a small brain and a large face and jaw. And although they were tree climbers, they also had an erect posture, which means they were bipedal. They stood on 2 legs for walking. The most complete female skeletal remains of Australopithecus afarensis and Ardipithecus rhamidus are contained in a museum located in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The discovered Ardipithecus rhamidus is dated to over 3 million years ago, and they named her Ardi, which means ground or floor. The preserved Australopithecus afarensis was discovered in 1974 in the mud of a lake, and she was named Lucy. The main difference between the chimpanzee, Ardi, and Lucy are their hip bones, or pelvis. The pelvis reflects how primates walk. Ardi's pelvis is very similar to our pelvis in terms of bipedalism. Chimpanzees display features typical of primates using both arms and legs for walking and tree climbing. Lucy's pelvis displays features of Ardi's as well as chimpanzees. This mix indicates that Lucy was probably bipedal on the ground, but also a very good tree climber. Around 2.7 to 2.3 million years ago, Australopithecus aethiopias walked the earth. Their name means ape that live alongside humans. This period in Earth's history is known as the Quaternary period, which spans roughly from 2.58 million years ago to present. The evolution of Australopithecus aethiopicus was revolutionary because they were the first of the robust Australopithecines, and they were called Paranthropus. Robust refers to the heavily built mandible, crested cranium, and very large cheek teeth. It is hypothesized that these Australopithecines had started to exploit more open savanna environments and included tougher, harder, and more abrasive foods than did Lucy's clan. Their brain was small with a narrow skull. Australopithecus aethiopicus occupied Kenya and Omo Valley in Ethiopia. Alongside them evolved an even more robust hominin called Australopithecus bozei. They lived between 2.3 to 1.4 million years ago in Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Kenya. This group is considered the most specialized species of robust Australopithecus because they had larger and more robust jaws and teeth than in Australopithecus aethiopicus. Its large and thick cheekbones and bony crest on the top of the brain case relates to its well-developing chewing muscles. Australopithecus bozei was between 4 to 4 feet 6 inches in height and weighed between 75 to 108 pounds. So far, they appear to be the heaviest of the bunch. They are said to be the first group to produce stone tools, and this was a major shift in humankind history because it dramatically improved the way of life of our ancestors and made any further cultural developments possible. Now, along Australopithecus bosea existed the early Homo erectus. So at this point, we've covered some of the branches of the Australopithecine family tree, although there are several others. However, these ones are believed to have played a significant role in human evolution. Now we're about to explore our most recent ancestors in the Homo family. They are the first to stand erect full time and completely lose all of their fur, bearing pure black skin. These changes wholly revolutionized the way of life for the upcoming modern humans. Now, Homo erectus occupied Africa from about 1.7 to 1 million years ago, and Asia from about 1.5 to well past 500,000 years ago. This group is said to be the direct ancestors of modern humans. They had a human-like gait, body proportions, height, and brain capacity. They are also believed to be the first human ancestors to start fires, speech, hunt and gather in coordinated groups, care for sick and injured, and possibly make art. Around 1.5 million years ago, it was Homo erectus that first exited Africa to spread throughout the world, specifically to Eurasia and various lands throughout Africa, especially Ethiopia. Several branches of Homo erectus evolved in the regions they exploited. For instance, Homo heidelbergensis is the group that split from the African tribe and migrated to Europe during an interglacial period, or a period of global warming. They are believed to have given rise to the Neanderthals, also called Homo neanderthalensis. Homo rhodesiensis occupied the former Rhodesia, which is now Zambia. Humankind have this group to thank for our existence because they are believed to have given rise to the Homo sapiens, or modern humans. Homo erectus is the reason modern humans share 98% of the same biological makeup as the Neanderthals. The group that remained in Africa evolved into anatomically modern humans, or Homo sapiens adultu, roughly 200,000 years ago. During the era of human evolution, the Earth was in the Pleistocene epoch, commonly referred to as the era of the Ice Age. It only ended 11,700 years ago, spanning the world's most recent period of repeated ice ages. This epoch began about 2.6 million years ago and is the first epoch in the Quaternary period. Cycles of climatic changes, large ice sheets, ice caps, and valley glaciers were significant in defining the Pleistocene epoch. Most of the world was uninhabitable due to being covered in ice that came mostly from Greenland and Antarctica, but covered most of the northern hemisphere. The only habitable environments were dotted regions throughout Africa and Southeast Asia, which were extremely hot. During the middle of the Pleistocene epoch, humankind was born within the Great Lakes region, almost on the equator. Over a long period of time, Homo sapiens and their descendants spread throughout the world. They moved from place to place, seeking more resources, and made further progress that led to Homo sapiens sapiens, which are us today. Human culture reached beyond art, science, language, and all of the elements of human life. While we are not the first hominin to display extraordinary cultural adaptations, we are the only ones who have taken them to such extremes. It is complex culture that uniquely defines Homo sapiens and differentiates us from early apes and hominids. Professor Kabahiawatha says that humans are primitive and unspecialized primates. However, because of their ground-dwelling lifestyle, humans eventually acquired 3 special gifts: intellect, reason, and language. These 3 characteristics separated hominids from pongids and all other animals. The body type and physical appearance that changed over millions of years from ape-tending, tree-dwelling pongids to human-tending, ground-dwelling hominids includes the development of the power to grasp, the development of hind lower limbs, recession of the snout, the nose and mouth regions, the perfection of the upright posture, the loss of tail, and the loss of body hair. In his book, The Journey of Man, A Genetic Odyssey, author Spencer Wells tells us that a black-skinned African woman who is believed to have lived about 150,000 years ago was excavated, and using DNA sequencing, she has been directly linked to the infinite generations of mitochondrial DNA. The media named her mitochondrial Eve, the mother of us all. She is the real Eve, not to be confused with the biblical Eve with the Judeo-Christian Bible. According to scientists, this woman can be linked back to every person on Earth through mitochondrial DNA. Therefore, she's been deemed the mother of all humankind. She wasn't the only woman living at the time, but it was her mitochondrial genes that were the most successful and the only ones to survive. It was her daughters and granddaughters that took modern humans out of Africa to populate the rest of the world. Professor Kabahiawatha summarizes the evolution of the human family, saying, Homo sapiens sapiens, at this point of evolutionary development, got to his or her physical perfection. Their hands were the right size, their organs worked as they should, the endocrine glands distributed the right amount of liquids throughout the body to be able to function properly, the skeletal system fortified the body so that the muscular system could stand erect, the respiratory system breathed, while the circulatory system allowed the blood to carry oxygen throughout the body. The digestive system ate, while the excretory system got rid of everything the body could not use constructively. The reproductive system recreated other humans, and the immune system protected the body from invading enemies. The human family must thank our predecessors for all of the phenomenal gifts we inherited from the earlier forms of algae, fish, amphibians, reptiles, and early mammals. These characteristics include cells and nuclei from cyanobacteria, backbone and jaw from the fish, lungs and limbs from the amphibians, watertight skin from the reptiles, sharper senses and manner of birth from the early nocturnal mammals, hands and color vision from the primates, and larger brains, intellect, reason, and language from the early humans. Our hominid ancestors made decisions that would eventually lead to higher mental capability, allowing for syntax and language. As nature changes, it also selects the necessary genetics for the species to survive in its global environment, a process called natural selection. The species then modifies its behavior for efficient sustenance and go on to reproduce and diversify. In this way, human existence is simply a biological response to nature. Currently, we humans exist in the Holocene epoch, which began roughly 11,700 years ago. We've witnessed significant growth in the human species across the entire planet. Our technological advances have dramatically simplified life as compared to our hominid ancestors, allowing us to live much longer. Our lives are no longer at the mercy of climate, as we've mastered survival in all climatic conditions, allowing us to reside anywhere on Earth, even in the most brutal environments. None of this would have been possible had nature not provided the very first life forms with the genetic and behavioral tools necessary for human evolution. Okay, so go ahead, study group, and leave some comments below. What are your thoughts about human evolution? We've been evolving from the moment we emerged, and scientists are making predictions of what we will look like and be capable of thousands of years from now as the Earth continues to warm up and environments change. Professor Kabahia Watakamene has a webinar discussing future humans called Super Sapiens, and this is definitely worth watching. I personally think it's interesting to get an idea of what our descendants will be like. So go ahead and leave some comments below and let me know your thoughts. Also, if you have any topics that you'd like for me to cover, please send them to blackhistorystudent@gmail.com. This email is listed in the description section below. If you're interested in reading any of the books that I've referenced in this commentary, I've listed them in the description section below. And if you decide to purchase them, please do so using my affiliate links because I do receive a little commission for each sale, and you will be supporting the channel by doing so. If you'd like to read the article on this topic, please click on the link in the description section or visit blackhistorystudent.com. Finally, if you haven't done so already, like the video. If you're new, subscribe to the channel, and if you love the video, share it. Until next time, bye study group!